Hey, what's up guys, Sir Emanon here, and welcome to my banlist prediction slash wishlist video for December 2020. Now, of course, this is going to be me succumbing to the hashtag free content that is Yu-Gi-Oh! Banlist season, but I do want to sort of insert and express my own thoughts into the conversation regarding what the banlist might look like, and I do want to be thorough, yet still a bit concise since a lot of this information is already out there. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started here. I'm going to preface this by saying a couple of things just to keep in mind. First off, the first section of this video is going to be predictive, which means that while I am going to, of course, try and remove my own personal conceptions of game balance and fun gameplay, things of that nature, there still might be personal biases that slip through the cracks, so definitely bear that in mind that I am not by any means perfectly objective. But when it comes to the wishlist section, I'll definitely be a lot more unfiltered and we'll definitely have a lot more interesting things to say. So stay tuned for that portion of the video if you guys would like to hear about that. There's also certain things that of course drive the ban list that we might not necessarily as players know about. So there's of course the fact that Konami's conception of game balance very much differs from a lot of players as we have seen over the years. There's also things like product sales that we're not privy to and future card design that we're largely, left in the dark about, of course. So the fact of the matter is that we don't necessarily know what is ultimately going to be the main driving force for Konami's ban list decisions. So that's kind of what the fun of making a prediction in the first place is that we don't know. But in the context of the current competitive environment, which is going to be COVID-19, I think that the current trend of Konami not hitting cards released past March 2020 is going to continue, which means that you're going to see an absence of certain cards, and this will be a very prime explanation for that. So as always, definitely feel free to agree or disagree in the comments. Discourse is always welcome, and I would love to hear your thoughts. So we're going to go ahead and move to the prediction part of the video now. As a reminder, this is what I think will happen, not what I want to happen. So first, we're going to talk about Dragon Buster Destruction Sword. This card needs very little introduction. It's very crippling and game-ending against a wide variety of the metagame strategies at the moment. It's super easy to access, it's very generic to make, and very generic to use. It's also a very good contingency plan at that. And I think that this card has a parallel to like Mystic Mine in the fact that, you have to draw very specific, generally unsearchable outs to beat this card. But the difference between this card and Mystic Mine is that this card is used a lot more aggressively and is a lot easier to utilize. Whereas, Mystic Mine is a little bit harder to search out, and of course, it's going to promote a lot slower gameplay. With Dragon Buster Destruction Sword in a combo deck, you're typically going to get OTK'd the vast majority of the time the turn afterward. But with Mystic Mine, you have at least some time to draw into your outs, which is why I think that card is a lot less problematic at the moment. But this card being hit would also be fine for the combo decks simply because they have a lot of other sort of tools to default back to that don't involve this sort of unfair, uninteractive lock. Next is going to be the Guard Dragon LP hits. So this is going to be just more of a matter of the fact that dragons have been in the metagame for almost 2 years now. And to quote a Deception, Lone Fire Blossom should not be in your extra deck. This card is very limiting in terms of what Dragons Konami can release in the future. And just in general, I think that if you want to hit Dragon Link and not hit the other combo decks in the format, this is the card that is specific to the Dragon strategy or archetype or just typing in general, that doesn't interfere with the other combo decks that might still want some time in the spotlight in the metagame, which I think is deserved for some of these decks. Next is going to be Smoke Grenade the Thief. This card, of course, allows you to have very searchable and accessible hand knowledge, which is always very strong, but also allows you to take away your opponent's options to deal with your board. So not only does the player, utilizing Smoke Grenade have the ability to actually navigate a lot easier, thus reducing the amount of options that they have and the amount of choices they need to make, but it also reduces the amount of choices that the opponent has just available at their disposal to begin with. So just due to the fact that both players have less sort of agency and freedom in terms of what they can do to sort of interact, I feel like this card definitely has to go for sure. Not to mention the fact that, of course, it isn't once per turn. Now, of course, I think that Infernoble still has very many ways to sort of keep up with the metagame that don't involve this card, even though, of course, this is a very strong component of Infernoble. But I think that just as a sort of pure combo focused deck, that deck can still definitely thrive. And I think it should still have time to thrive simply because it hasn't been in the metagame for too long yet. It's only really been one format, really. So I think that this card is fine as kind of just the sole hit. So that's actually it for the ban cards. We can move to the limited section now. So first off is going to be Miscellaneous Source. So this card, of course, everyone kind of has on their radar at the moment. It removes interaction in a way that is not particularly, is not particularly fun for the opponent, simply because your opponent can just drop this at any time. It reduces sort of the capacity to make certain reads. Like if you want to time your interruptions in a certain way, this card kind of denies those windows. Whereas if you compare it to a card like Lost World, even though that card also kind of turns off interaction in some respects as far as targeting is concerned, that card has a much bigger, a sensible, and obvious window to where your opponent can interact. So with this card, you can just drop it at any moment, of course, which is not really a, is not really conducive to just making meaningful decisions, and thus I feel like is not only a good hit to just promote more interaction, but also a good hit for consistency purposes. Next, we're going to go ahead and talk about Electromite, which is a pretty interesting one. So this is primarily because of the support that's upcoming in Blazing Vortex. Is that support going to be meta defining? Probably not. But I do think that this card can be conducive to sort of supporting Pendulum strategies, just to be able to enable not only the new metaphor support, but just see a little bit more spotlight in the metagame itself. If you guys do remember, this card actually got banned alongside Servant of Endymion getting limited to 1 back in January. So I think those two hits together were kind of already quite a lot in terms of reducing Pendulum's power level, especially when it was, towards the end of Toss format when the other 4 decks were already seeing more play. So that being said, I think that this card definitely can come back and allow for Pendulums to experiment a bit more. That deck definitely has some deck building sort of paradigms and just not paradigms but paradoxes that you kind of have to contend with as far as not being able to fit in a lot of hand traps in the main deck, whereas other combo decks have flexibility to sort of just have sort of fail safes for going second in game 1. So I think Pendulum as a deck definitely can see a little bit more play, and people will be happy about that. Next is the Unlimits. These 4 cards, Seer, Graph, ABC Dragon Buster, and Totally Awesome. They went to 2 in the last list. There's not really any reason they shouldn't go to 3. They haven't been really doing a whole ton, and this is a continual trend for the semi-limited section. So we're just going to go ahead and now move on into the wish list. So this is going to be kind of crazy in some respects. I tried to be not too insane looking at you, MBT, but I did want to have a little bit of fun and sort of just present some sort of thought experiments that you guys might want to talk about in the comment section. So I look forward to that. But first off, we're going to go over the banned cards. Of course, this is going to include much of the predicted sections. So Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, LP, Smoke Grenade, and next we're going to talk about True of All Calamities. So I don't think this card is going to actually be hit, simply because a big selling point of Phantom Rage is Virtual World, and a big selling point of Virtual World is this card. So even though this card just removes interaction and is completely unfun to play against for most players, it really is probably going to survive another format, I feel. And some people are talking about limiting this card, which definitely is interesting to talk about, especially in the context of the way Virtual World specifically utilizes it. But I realistically think that Konami is either going to keep this card at 3 or at 0. I don't really see them limiting it. So that's where I feel like that is going to stand, is just continually unlimited. But I would like to see it banned just for the purposes of, introducing and promoting fun gameplay. Next is some portion of the Hal Cross combos. I think Link Cross is a lot more problematic in a lot of cases, simply because it allows you to sort of have extension without committing additional cards, just because the Link 1 design philosophy in general is already very, very strong. But add to the fact that you don't have to actually have additional support from what you're already doing. Like you could, if you already were able to make a Link 2 like Fiber or Isolde or things of that nature, you could just make this card without any additional investment, and you get access to extension that you might not have had access to previously. So this card, I think, is a lot more of the payoff actually of those other combos, and is what allows other decks to extend their ceiling in ways that they might not have been able to previously. Now, will this card be hit? Again, because I don't think that any card released March 2020 or beyond will be hit. I don't think so, but it would be nice to see this as far as just trying to diversify the types of combos that are present in the metagame. Next is going to be the limited section. So I have a couple of things here. Obviously, we got the other cards from the prediction section being Miscellaneousaurus and Electromite, but we also got Salamangreat Mirage Stalio. So of the 4 decks in Toss format being Thunder, Orcus, Striker, and Salamangreat, I think Salamangreat is the deck that does the least amount of unfair things, and is the card that if I were to pick one deck to have a banned card come back or a card move further off the list, it would be Salamangreat. So I think that this card isn't going to fix Salamangreat's problems as far as just the native power creep of things like Secret Slayers and beyond, but what I do think, excuse the heater in the background, what I do think will happen is that this deck will have a little bit more tools to kind of just combat the metagame, and I think that that is definitely desirable. Next is going to be kind of my biased decision, which is going to be Lunalight Tiger. So, yeah, is this card able to come back? I actually can spend a video kind of debating this, and I do personally think it can. The TLDR version of that argument is that this deck needs 2 specific cards to combo, whereas other decks like Dragon Link and Infinite will either need only 1 card or 2 cards that are very fluid, generic, and can work as starters or extenders. Lunalight doesn't have that advantage. It's very telegraphed, it's easy to disrupt, and it's very, very much not going to be as strong as other people might think it is. Of course, that being said, the card is still a very strong card, not being once per turn, and people have a lot of complaints about this card, so I don't think it will happen, but a man can dream. Next, we're going to move on to the semi-limited section, and that is going to actually be the dangers. So this is another kind of pipe dream, and I think a lot of people would have a lot of opposition to this, understandably, but I think that not a lot of decks would actually make a whole ton of use of these cards, except for kind of rogue combo decks. So you can think of decks like Orcus, for example. I think that having a set of cards like the dangers that can kind of promote, just various styles of gameplay is pretty nice to see in the game. And I think that when these cards were at 2, they were in a pretty good spot where they didn't feel overbearing, like you didn't have to deal with them every single match. But at the same time, the decks that did make use of them could at least profitably use them without having to, rely on the worst danger names, while still feeling, fairly reasonable, right? Like, I don't think that these cards would see play like Infinite, right? But you can see things in, like, again, Orcus or like Phantom Knights maybe. So just a lot of other cool ways to kind of experiment with these cards, I think would be a pretty decent sort of thing to sort of just have lying around. And then there is Emergency Teleport. In a world where a VFD is banned, this card coming back would of course not make up for that, but it will at least give a consistency boost to Virtual World, where they can sometimes have consistency issues. So I think that would be a nice sort of exchange, I guess, in the name of interactivity and just keeping Virtual World as prominent as it will be. I think that deck still has a lot of positives going for it, even with the absence of VFD. But of course, VFD is just such an auto-win button that's hard to replace it. But this is sort of a little bit of a consolation prize, if you will. And then finally, we have the unlimited section. So we got the 4 cards, of course, that we already talked about. But I want to also talk about Call by the Grave and Sekka's Light. So Call by the Grave is a pretty interesting one because I feel like at this point, its only real purpose is to either aid rogue decks or to serve as a control tool, because combo decks right now in the metagame have kind of moved beyond the need for Call by the Grave. Not only because certain hand traps, like the most powerful ones, don't even get affected by Call by the Grave to begin with, but also I feel like a lot of people are just valuing extenders at this point rather than having the room for Call by the Grave. Like, are we seeing Call by the Grave in Infernoble or Dragon Link? Not often. Will we see it if they were at 3? Perhaps, but again, it's like, would you really play this over other extenders that functionally would fulfill the same purpose of playing through a hand trap, when the hand traps your opponent might not even again be stopped by Call by the Grave? It's really hard to say, and I think that a lot of people would just err on the side of playing more hand trap or play more extenders. So that's why I think that Call by the Grave can definitely come back. I think it was a hit that a lot of people kind of were upset about, but people can definitely experiment with this card again and just play with it in maybe rogue strategies. And then for Sekka's Light, I think this card is very interesting as far as sort of deck building is concerned, because you have cards again like Mystic Mine in the game where this card is kind of just it kind of doesn't line up very well with it, right? Because if you have to maybe like side deck outs to it, then it makes Sekka's Light worse in games 2 and 3, and they just don't have a native out to Mystic Mine in game 1. And then there's also things to consider like just powerful spell starters like Chaos Space. So there's just a lot of cards that make it so that it makes the argument for playing Sekka's Light a lot harder than maybe it was previously, to where like Sekka's Light was an auto include in a lot of decks. But I think that players given the sort of ability to make that choice for themselves is definitely not a bad thing, especially when this card has such a heavy sort of cost to it just by playing it in general. But that is going to be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching it. Definitely, again, leave comments on what you guys think about this ban list and what you think might be needed or desired to shake up the game. But let me know what you guys think. As always, leave a like if you enjoyed. Be sure to support me by subscribing, as well as check out the links in the description below to all social media platforms, as well as supporting me on Patreon or TCG Player. And until next time, I'll catch you in the next video. See you guys.